Dear God, offer us good news, good thoughts, as we ask ourselves for hearing hearts. Amen. It's time for school to start in some places. Every year at Beloit College, you may know this, in Wisconsin, they prepare their faculty and staff for the incoming class of freshmen by reminding them of just what these kids have and have not lived through. So here are a few of the things that are shaping the class of 2025. They have never licked a postage stamp. Color photos have always adorned the front page of the New York Times. Hybrid automobiles, they've always been there, as has Google, and The Lion King is still going on Broadway. The only memory of 9/11 they get from the news. They may have no idea of the context also behind the following 4 quotes. Read my lips, no new taxes. I'm not a crook. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. Now, one should also ask, does it matter whether or not they know these things and where they come from? The poet T.S. Eliot is remembered to have written, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" As we were reminded by our children, it has a lot to do, with whatever wisdom is, it's a lot more than just knowing stuff. So, wisdom. That's our subject today. Do you have it? Do you know it when you hear it? Is it maybe something as rare as happiness or perfect pitch? To be wise about wisdom, I think we need to realize first that wisdom does and does not increase with age. A certain amount of reflection on one's experience is necessary for wisdom, but there are those who have had a lot of experience in this world and have learned very little from it. I mean, we all know people who are 60, but instead of having 60 years of experience, they've had 1 year of experience 60 times. At the end of the day, what is this business of wisdom? Well, Matt read from Virginia Woolf. The compensation of growing old was simply this, that the passions remain as strong as ever, but one had gained at last the power of taking hold of experience and of turning it round slowly in the light. Someone has said that what all definitions of wisdom have in common is the capacity and the willingness to step back from the immediacy of the moment, whether it is an effect, a judgment, or a conflict, in order to attain perspective. So, people who are biblically literate will remember a story that comes in the reign of Solomon, besides the one that we focused on in the text this morning. 2 young women come to the king carrying one baby, and the one says that the other rolled over and smothered her baby in the night and then exchanged the dead child with the living one they brought before the king. The other mother denies it and says the opposite was true. The other mother rolled over on her baby. So Solomon called for a sword, remember, to be brought. Divide the baby in two, he said, and give each a half. Great idea. Then one mother says, by no means, give it to her. The other says, no, go ahead and divide it. And Solomon says, give the baby to the first, for she is the real mother. And all Israel knew there was a wise king in Israel. Well, Solomon, the young king, certainly seemed wise, but in his old age, Solomon, if you've read the story, proved as foolish as any king of Israel. As foolish as a famous king portrayed, in fact, by William Shakespeare, called King Lear, who was, 60? Lear shows himself to be a self-indulgent fool, a man of very poor judgment. And then his court fool says, thou shouldst not have been old before thou hadst been wise. Maybe Solomon was merely clever. Well, the text, as we've been reflecting, has that story which sounds a little like Aladdin and the magic lamp, right? When Solomon's granted one wish and asks for God for wisdom. Because you have asked this, says God, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the lives of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a hearing heart. So what makes wisdom more blessable, I should say, than asking for long life or gobs of gold or praying for the death of your enemies? Well, let's look at the three of those. First, long life is great, but 10 or 20 extra years doesn't always add up to something. On his last evening alive, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to a church gathering in Memphis where he is remembered to have said, I'd like to live a long time. Longevity has its place, but it doesn't matter with me now. I've been to the mountaintop. And number two, money. Money is a cushion against circumstances, right? It's maybe the comfort food of life. But large amount of it tend to insulate us from what is truly essential about living. It has been noted, $75,000 a year will buy you all the happiness money can buy you. Any more than that will not help you. In fact, anything over $75,000 tends to distract from satisfaction. But most people have not gotten that memo. There are even churches where it's preached that God wants everyone to be filthy rich. Number three. Asking for the death of your enemies. That also insulates you, I think. Here's why. I was in the room once down at Trinity Church in our town when someone asked Rabbi Kushner, and I'm speaking of Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, a man I would deem a wise man for sure, asked this question. Rabbi, how can we best hear the voice of God? And Kushner took his time, and then he gave this answer. He said, you want to hear the voice of God? Listen to people you can't stand. The Dalai Lama of Tibet was once asked, who have been your most important spiritual teachers? And without hesitation, the Dalai Lama said, the communist Chinese, the people who threw him out of Tibet and massacred and tortured thousands of his monks. And what the Dalai Lama was saying was, if you speak of universal love and don't take into account people who persecute you and persecute those you love, then you're just making noise. You're just being glib about loving everybody. When Solomon asked for wisdom, he literally asked, as I said, for a hearing heart. And in the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, there is this verse that goes with that. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries out, to you, O people, I call, and my cry is to all that live. Where is it to be found, this wisdom? At the crossroads, at the portals, those transition places in our lives that give us all rumbling stomachs and fidgety legs and major challenges. These are the times we are most susceptible to wisdom. And we can welcome it or we can run from it. I'm speaking of times of crisis. So remember those two Chinese characters that make up the word crisis. Remember? Danger and opportunity. Life is not easy for the faint of heart. Such people are tempted, right, to give themselves up completely. You know, I don't want to think anymore. So many people are tempted to look for the perfect master, right? Someone to follow blindly. Maybe it's because several times in my life I've lived in Marin County, California, and Ashland, Oregon. But I'll tell you, half the people you meet on the street in those two places claim to either be enlightened or to be looking for the perfect master. I have good friends who thought the Bhagwan Rajneesh was the wisest man who ever lived. Remember him? His 72 Rolls Royces was featured in that incredible Netflix series. Oh my God. He was certainly clever. I don't know. I don't want to judge another person's religion. That's wrong. But the Apostle Paul, for one, did not say, go find a new and wise teacher. No, he said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That's a religion I can subscribe to. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Even Jesus did not claim to teach us all the world's wisdom. He said, I still have many things to teach you, but you cannot bear them now. However, when the Spirit of truth comes, the Spirit will guide you into all the truth, so you can understand what you can understand when you are ready to understand. So underlying all this is a critical truth that life is a school. Wisdom is hard won over considerable time. So let me say a few words about someone I've found to, in fact, be fairly wise. The late Ram Dass, who was born Richard Alpert. In the early 60s, remember, he taught at Harvard alongside Timothy Leary in the psychology department. And they experimented, remember, with LSD. And when Richard Alpert was fired for that, he traveled to India. He studied Eastern religion. He took lots of mushrooms and was trying to find his way, he said, at that time, to be high all the time. He'd go home from his sojourns, and his father would ask, "Have you found a job yet?" And then he'd say to himself, "My parents bring me down," or "Society brings me down," or "Money brings me down." But finally, one day, after going back and forth, something he said finally clicked in him. Maybe life as it's given to us is not a mistake. Maybe it's a school. And if that's true, why not take the curriculum? So here's my point. Everything that happens to us in life is our teacher, right? The secret seems to be to learn to sit at the feet of your own life. To sit at the feet of the life you have, where you are. David Cooper has said, in the end, everyone is your teacher. On one level or another, the child is our teacher, our friends, our family, the stranger on the street. Every experience is a challenge. A teaching is always hidden in it. Every thought that bubbles up in our minds can teach us things about ourselves if we are able to listen. Last week I spent 4 wonderful days with my granddaughters, ages 3 and 1. I'm exhausted. But they are currently my most important teachers. Well, they teach me about the most important things, right? But you have to pay attention. Does not wisdom call, said the proverb. Does not understanding raise her voice? Pema Chodron, a wonderful Buddhist teacher who I've quoted before from this pulpit, has said something deeper than profound. She said, "Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know." Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Life is a school, right? So let me ask you, what nagging thing in your life is your current professor, right? What essential thing about life are you on the verge of learning? What's the syllabus that's been presented to you by this, that, or the other? What are you needing to learn in your bones? Years ago, I officiated at the memorial service for my father-in-law. Then, just after midnight of that day, my own mother died in Sacramento, unexpectedly. My learning curve for something was suddenly incredibly steep. And of course, the lesson was about mortality. But I'd gotten a lesson in that pretty strongly when my father died at the age of 62, years before that. So I thought there must be something more going on here. I did the service for my mother the following Thursday, and then on Friday morning, I was driving and I was tuned to NPR, and an interview was going on. And the first words I heard when I turned the radio on were these: "When our parents die, we may think the relationship is over, but the fact is, it is just beginning." Bong. But things like that happen all the time. Serendipity is everywhere. It's like the most palpable argument for God there is. It's also evidence that life is web-like. Everything is linked to everything else. Everything. There is no summer break in the school of living. And the relationship with our parents does go on. I remember how important my dreams became to me after my father's passing. He came to me often in the night. And things changed in those dreams as they went along. Now, we had what I thought was a really good relationship, but there was evidence in my dreams that it needed tending, that relationship. And in time it became as comfortable as the fit of a favorite pair of gloves. But that took time. And nearly the same thing happened with my mother. Our relationship was so complicated. She was a very troubled person. But in a dream I had like 3 years after her passing, she became very vulnerable to me in the dream in a way she had only become vulnerable a couple of times in my life. And I was able at that moment to say, "I love you." And I woke up feeling purged. Now, we may not always want to wrestle with our living. No one should do that all the time. It would be too hard. Some people, however, would rather avoid that at all costs, right? Well, nearly 100 years ago, the great poet Rainer Maria Rilke exchanged a series of letters with a young poet who looked at this world and all its shortcomings and the inexorable reality of death and was tempted to believe there had been some mistake at creation. Among other things, the elder poet wrote him the following words. He said, "We are set down in life as in the element to which we best correspond. And over and above this, we have, through thousands of years of accommodation, become so like this life that when we hold still, we are, through a happy mimicry, scarcely to be distinguished from all that surrounds us. We have no reason to mistrust our world, for it is not against us. It has its terrors. They are our terrors. It has its abysses. Those abysses belong to us. There are dangers at hand. We must try to love them. And if only we arrange our life according to that principle which counsels us that we must always hold to the difficult, then that which now seems to us the most alien will become what we most trust and find most faithful." For all of us, no matter our belief structure, life is our first teacher. It seems to me that the happiest and most fulfilled of us are those most able to allow themselves to sit at the feet of their own life. So, there are a number of ways of doing this. Journaling is really good. Having coffee with a good friend on a regular basis, someone you know, who draws you out, who's not afraid of asking hard questions, right? A trusted friend can be of incredible help. After my daughter was diagnosed with breast cancer this last April, I found another way. I had to. I set up a meditation table in my apartment. Catholics would call it a home altar. Hindus would call it a puja table or a puja shrine. I'm not naturally good at prayer. So this has been a help to me. It's a terrific way to sit at the feet of your own life. And on this table, I put a bunch of things. Several pictures of my daughter at different places in her life. And her two daughters, I have their pictures there. I have a picture of my dad. I have a candle, as you might imagine. And a rosary, a Catholic rosary, which I've never prayed, but I'm giving it a shot. I have just a little bit of poetry written in the script of a long dead friend of mine I admire more than anybody I know. I have a signed photo of Mr. Rogers. And because I said earlier in this sermon that to hear the voice of God, we have to attend to the words of our enemies, on my meditation table, I put a photo of Tucker Carlson. Now, I apologize ahead of time if he is a hero of yours. But if he is, let me tell you that I'm trying to hear what he is saying. Because I know that millions of people who are not so different from me adore him. This is where I do my work. I have so much to learn. But I take heart that, as Pema Chodron said, nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know.